So I was thinking of topics for a new video and I came across a website that lists different questions according to a niche. So I typed in barrister and got 121 questions. I'm not promising to answer all of them, but here's some of them. Let's go. So first of all, and much to the dismay of some of the comment trolls in the comment section, I am a practicing barrister. I'm also a practicing mediator. I have my own barristers' chambers, my own law firm. I'm authorised to conduct litigation. I'm authorised to do public access. I sit on the Bar Council's public access panel. And yes, I still practice law as well as YouTube. So let's get into the questions. So these questions are batched into different prefixes. The first one is R. Are barristers essential workers? Yes. Are barristers lawyers? Yes. Lawyer is a fairly generic term and barristers are indeed lawyers. Are barristers required to wear wigs? Well, yes and no. In all criminal cases in the Crown Court, barristers will wear wigs, but not in the Magistrates' Court. We will also not wear wigs in youth courts, in family courts, and small claims hearings in the County Court, although we will wear them before a circuit judge. But only for trials, not for applications. So you can probably see there's lots of different rules about when we do and do not wear the wig. And by the way, when we wear the wig, we do also wear the gown and bands, which is what you see in some of my profile pictures. Are barristers and solicitors lawyers? Yes. Are barristers self-employed? Well, a lot of us are, and some of us are in dual practice, such as myself. Again, much to the dismay of one of the angry commenters saying that I'm only self-employed. Well, the vast majority of the bar is self-employed, but there is also the employed bar. I'm both. I'm both self-employed and employed, hence dual practice. Are barristers better than solicitors? Well, that depends. Are barristers officers of the court? No. Unlike solicitors, barristers have never really been considered an officer of the court, but we do have full rights of audience. Are barristers rich? Again, that depends. The next prefix is can. Can barristers certify documents? Yes, for the most part. Can barristers have tattoos? Yes, unless they have certain slogans that people are going to see, which would bring the profession into disrepute. But generally, most tattoos are hidden, and there is no strict rule, I think, against having a tattoo. I'd have to check. Can barristers work in law firms? Yes, absolutely. That's what I was referring to earlier. I have a law firm that I am employed by, but I also have a self-employed practice. Many barristers are employed by firms to go to court or to do drafting work or advisory work. Can barristers refuse cases? Yes, although there is a cab rank rule, meaning that if the fee is a proper fee and you are available and you've got the requisite experience and there's no conflict of interest and no other reason why you shouldn't take the case, then you must take the case, so long as it's coming from a professional client, i.e. someone licensed to instruct you or a solicitor. However, there are certain times when you can refuse a case and certain times when you must refuse a case. The big ones being when there's a conflict of interest and things like that, or maybe you've acted for the other side before and there's an obvious conflict of interest, then in some of those situations you must refuse the instructions and turn down the case. Can barristers work from home? Yes. Can barristers become solicitors? Yes, and some do. Some go from being at the bar to become a solicitor, and some the other way around. I know some solicitors that have become barristers, and I think it's possible to hold both, though I'd have to check. But in a lot of situations, it's not really necessary because I'm authorised to conduct litigation, like I said at the outset, which is one of the broad distinctions between what solicitors and barristers do. Solicitors tend to do more of the litigation and barristers tend not to do litigation, although I do both. One of the biggest distinctions, however, between barristers and solicitors is that barristers cannot and must not hold or control client funds. Solicitors can, solicitors do, and I'm not sure about the statistics, so don't quote me, but I think it's one of the most common reasons solicitors get struck off the roll because they mishandle client money. Can barristers choose their cases? Well, subject to what I said before about the cab rank rule, yes and no, but if you are doing public access work, i.e. there's no solicitor or other professional client in between you, then yes, you can just choose your cases. You do not have to take a public access case. Although it's worth bearing in mind that you cannot and must not discriminate against somebody. For example, you cannot say, I am not taking this case because this person is XYZ, insert protected characteristic upon which you must not discriminate any other person. Those are not reasons you can refuse a case, but you could refuse a case just because you don't want to work on Fridays. Can barristers advertise? Yes, and again there are rules about it. You cannot advertise for something that you are not competent in. You cannot say you're the best. You cannot say you're better than someone else. you cannot be misleading and all those kinds of things. But otherwise, yes, of course, you can advertise. Most barristers become part of a chambers, and then it's the chambers that advertises for work, and then the chambers that allocates work to the barrister. But even then, some barristers choose to do their own advertising, particularly if it's for public access work, so we advertise for our own work. I am very grateful in that with my channel here, I get lots and lots of inquiries all the time, and I personally don't need to advertise for that reason, so thank you. The next prefix is how do. How do barristers' chambers work? Well, a barristers' chambers is effectively a group of barristers that come together to pool resources and share the costs of marketing, of running an office, what you might think of as secretarial work, which is actually clerking. So the clerks will manage the barristers' diaries and casework and all of that kind of thing. So essentially, barristers will pay fees into chambers partly as rent, usually several £100s per month, plus a percentage of the work that they generate. Typically 15 or 20%, sometimes more, sometimes a bit less, and some chambers don't charge a rent, they just charge a percentage. How do barristers get paid? Well, again, that depends. If it's coming from a solicitor, it will be the solicitor that pays the barrister's fees, and the barrister raises a fee note against that. If it's public access, the barrister will bill the client directly and the client will pay directly. Normally in advance, because barristers on public access will usually not do the work before they've been paid for it, though not always. Some barristers do that. How do barristers get work? Well, there's a huge chunk of work that comes from solicitors and a sizable chunk that comes from public access work. Most barristers don't get their work from licensed access, which is probably something you'll never need to understand. Think of it as accountants seeking specialist advisory work that they are licensed to obtain that advice on behalf of clients, by way of example. How do barristers and solicitors work together? Well, typically the solicitor will have conduct of the case. That means they will either file the case in court or they will respond to the case in court, and they will seek the barrister's advice on drafting, advice on merits, advice generally, and of course representation in court. So it's normally the barrister that you'll see in court, though not always. In some of the early hearings, you might well find solicitors going to those hearings, and some solicitors do obtain the higher right of audience, so you might see those in the Crown Courts and other courts as well, though less often than barristers, of course. How do barristers become QC, which is of course now KC, King's Counsel, as it was then Queen's Counsel before Her Majesty passed away? Well, usually after at least 15 or so years of practice in specialised areas, there is a very in-depth application and appointments procedure, at which point the barrister would be appointed King's Counsel. How do barristers charge? Well, most barristers will charge at an hourly rate, although for court hearings it is very often fixed either half a day or a full day, and then what we call refreshers, so a brief fee and refreshers. So very often one fixed amount for the first day, and then typically half of that for each subsequent day that the case continues for. How do barristers defend the guilty? Well, what I will say is the barristers do not defend the guilty, they defend the defendant, because they are not guilty until they've been convicted, at which point the barrister is no longer involved. So the barrister is defending someone who is charged with and accused of a crime. In criminal matters, of course. And only when they've been convicted, they become guilty. But let's actually answer the question. I always answer this question with broadly the same answer, which is for the system to be fair, it must be equally fought and defended. So if either barrister doesn't do a very good job, then these scales that you see on the courts of justice are tipped, and it's a corrupt system. So it must be fought and defended just as vigorously and just as fearlessly. That's why. Here's a really good one. How do barristers cross-examine? There's quite a lot to say on this, but very broadly it's as follows. The barrister will first and foremost put the opposing case to each witness, for example, to say that they are mistaken. Because if you want to say in closing, either to a judge or to a jury, that that person was mistaken, you must give them the opportunity to respond to that or respond to an allegation during cross-examination. Otherwise, you can't put it, because it's against the rules, to the judge or the jury at the end. What you will also do in cross-examination is undermine and discredit. So you will find weaknesses in the case. You will find some reason to discredit the witness. For example, they've had a long list of previous convictions, therefore why should anybody trust you now? Or simply undermining part of the evidence. For example, a very common one is you couldn't possibly be certain it was this defendant. For example, if it was dark, it was late, it was raining, there were cars in between, there were people in between, they were far away, they needed glasses, the defendant was wearing a coat, the defendant disappeared behind a bus. Therefore, in conclusion, you cannot possibly be certain that it was this person in the dock. That is generally what we put in cross-examination, and that's generally how it works. Well, I know that wasn't 121 questions, but that was the first batch of questions. If you like this Q&A series, give me questions of your own, or tell me that you like it, I'll do some more. Do that by giving the video a like and a subscribe, comment below, and I'll see you next time.